Hi everyone and welcome to this week's episode of WightWanderer. I hope that you are all well. Today then you join me not on the Isle of Wight. I'm in fact, as they say, over the pond on another island, Hayling Island to be precise. And I'm here today to walk an abandoned railway line. But when I say I of course mean we, because... Go.
Hi!
That's right, Nell's here, she's still with me. Jason Momoa is still unavailable. It's been a while, but we are back as a twosome and we are going to walk this line together. Hopefully, if the weather holds off. Before we start though...
Play the music.
So as you may have guessed then, today we are walking the Hayling Island branch line, better known as...
The Hayling Billy.
That's right, the Hayling Billy. And we've been meaning to walk this line for a while now, at least a year.
Round about that, yeah.
Yeah, we've been planning it for a little while, but obviously priorities and stuff. The reason though that we've been wanting to walk this line for so long is because it shares some interesting characteristics with branch lines on the Isle of Wight. It even had, at one point, a rather far-fetched direct rail connection with the island we call home. But more on that later. First, a little bit of history. The Hayling Island Railway was a branch line opened by the Hayling Railway Company in July 1867, stretching 4 miles from its junction at Havant down to its terminus at the north end of Staunton Avenue. However, the section between Havant and Langston Wharf opened for goods traffic 2 years earlier in 1865. But the 2 intermediate halts on the branch at Langston and Hayling North didn't open until the railway was complete. Today, the Hayling Billy Way is a popular footpath and cycle route renowned for its superb views over Murbury Harbour and Nature Reserve. But the former railway is also remembered fondly for its almost Reverend Audrey storyline character and uniqueness. One of the line's many quirks being its use of small ancient Terrier class locomotives. The line also helped to preserve one of our very own icons, W8 Freshwater, the locomotive operating on the branch after its return to the mainland in 1949. To begin our walk today then, we travel up Staunton Avenue to greet our first station of the day. We are actually doing this backwards in a sense because we are working our way up to Havant simply because we've got a train to catch, well, a rail replacement bus service anyway. So we are starting here at Hayling at a station simply called Hayling Island and working our way up. Now most of this is an industrial estate now, but as you can see the old goods shed behind us is still existent, now in use as a theatre. The terminus here first opened to passengers in 1867, originally named Hayling South. However, by 1892, the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway, who owned and operated the main line through Havant, were already leasing the branch from the Hayling Railway Company. And at that point in time, the name was changed. As a terminus, the station was somewhat simplistic in appearance, boasting 2 platforms but only 1 runaround loop. The station building itself being a rather unimposing structure, dwarfed in comparison to the neighbouring goods shed which we can still see on site today. However, Hayling South wasn't the first choice of location for the Hayling Railway Company's initial terminus. In fact, much like the Freshwater, Yarmouth and Newport Railway on the Isle of Wight, the company's original plans fell through, and they were forced to compromise and reroute. Initially, the Hayling Island route south involved a rather eagersome strategy to run the track along an embankment out across the waters, reclaiming much of the land in between in the process. So what went wrong? Well, right up until 1865, when goods trains were already active on the branch as far as Langston, this alignment was still on the cards. Indeed, parts of this embankment were actually built to the north. But the engineers soon found out that the water erosion was far too intense to manage. The company found themselves in a sticky situation, with half the line constructed and the other half unbuildable.
We reach the point now then where the trackbed starts to hug the water's edge. And out there, about 500 metres or so, would have been the original alignment of the railway had the Hayling Railway Company gotten their own way and stuck to the original plans. It would have passed on a big embankment and ran directly to the ferry terminal down there. Of course this never happens, but still the railway was subject to some fantastic views as the Billy passed on by.
The line somewhat inland across Hayling may have been a compromise, but it certainly was pretty, and more importantly, popular with tourists. Traffic, although seasonal, did run all year round, bar the odd period of severe bad weather. However, its success in operation wasn't just down to the influx of sun-seeking Victorian holidaymakers.
We're arriving now then at Hayling North, which was the site of a halt, nothing substantial, just one platform and a small wooden waiting shelter. But despite its discreetness, the halt was actually very useful indeed, especially for the transport of goods, namely fish and that great British delicacy, oysters.
Once upon a time, the oyster beds around Hayling were some of the richest in the country, their produce sought after across Britain. The remains of the oyster beds here are still very prominent today, partially encircled by an embankment imitating the alignment of the original planned route across the waters. At this point on the walk, we arrive at perhaps the most evident clue to the area's ghostly railway past. Here, a semaphore stands tall on the former trackbed, protecting perhaps the Hayling branch line's most iconic feature. The railway viaduct here at Langston was constructed in 1865, quite literally bridging the 1,000-foot gap between island and mainland. It was a feat of engineering when finished, and without it the railway would have never reached Hayling. Ironically though, it was also the reason for the railway's demise. Though many far-out branch lines closed in the 1950s, the Hayling Island line survived until the 60s. But in spite of the line being operated by light-footed Terrier locomotives, by 1962 Langston Viaduct was in desperate need of repairs. Although the branch was still making a marginal profit at the time, with the spans considered unsafe, the decision was made to close the entire line indefinitely. However, the viaduct wasn't the only interesting bit of railway-related trivia in the vicinity.
We're now crossing Langston Road Bridge, built in the 1950s, which replaced an original structure constructed in the 1820s. Now, I was going to cross the road and show you the original Wadeway, which is over there, and that dates back to the medieval period. But I'm not going to cross the road because the traffic is horrendous. However, over here is the site of the former railway wharf at Langston. And it's also the location of that very far-fetched Isle of Wight rail connection which I mentioned earlier.
See, when the line was opened as far as Langston in 1865, a quay was constructed here. And indeed, on the 1860s OS map, a short branch appears to the west of the running line, serving the area of the coal wharf. However, on a later OS map dated around the 1880s, we can see another wharf has made an appearance. This one to the eastern side of the running line. And this is our clue. How then could Langston have had a rail link to the Isle of Wight, without any kind of bridge or tunnel? Well, it's simple. A train ferry. A vessel upon which an entire train would be loaded and transported across the Solent. And yes, it does sound a little bonkers, but remember, this is the Victorians we are talking about. And in 1885, the Langston to St Helens train ferry indeed began operation. Now, it only operated for 3 years, and on top of that, only transported goods wagons. But in a broad sense, it was technically the only direct rail connection to ever exist between the Isle of Wight and the mainland. Continuing north, we reach the site of Langston Station, which, much like Hayling North, was very basic in design. Recognisable by its proximity to the main road and level crossing. With the road itself being the only one on and off Hayling Island, during the railway's operational period, the closure of the crossing gates would regularly result in some rather horrendous tailbacks.
The next station then for us is Havant, which of course is the last station. But between here and there are a couple of railway oddities which I want to check out, including an enigmatic engine shed which appears on an early OS map.
Up the trackbed and around the corner, we duck the Havant bypass, built in 1865 after the Branchline had disappeared. And it is here where our mysterious structure is shown.
There's the bypass there, and here was apparently the site of this original engine shed which appears on the map dated about 1860. But then by the 1900s it had gone. So it's a bit of an enigma really. Now I've scoured the internet and I can't find any photos of this engine shed at all. So please do let me know if a photo exists. It'd be interesting to have a look.
Heading north, the trackbed becomes increasingly wild, before emerging at this car park built on the former alignment, still surrounded by remnants of the railway's past. This was the site of 2 bridges, the first being a footbridge spanning the line to the south, and to the north is the bridge at East Street, a more substantial brick structure still standing today, soot stains and all. We continue then up the line to our final destination, and despite now almost losing her head,
You okay?
the walk itself has been relatively trouble-free.
We are then coming into Havant, the end of the line, or should I say the beginning of the line. Now Havant Station is rather interesting, chiefly because it's not the original station in Havant, nor is it the second. The one you can still see today is in fact the 3rd station in Havant, and it was constructed specifically for the Hayling Island branch.
See, before the coming of the Branchline, Havant wasn't really that notable a stop on the main line between Brighton and Portsmouth. When that railway was first opened in 1847 by the London, Brighton and South Coast, Havant Station was in fact nothing more than a primitive halt, located half a kilometre to the east of the current site. However, the company weren't alone in wanting to reach Portsmouth by rail. Their bitter rivals, the London South Western, were soon trying to move in on their turf. And this in 1858 led to an event rather over-dramatically named the Battle of Havant, when the Brighton boys knowingly used one of their trains to block the path of the London South Western's intended junction. This led to Hayling Station number 2, built by the London South Western Railway north of the junction. However, upon hearing of the intended branch line to Hayling Island, the companies came to an agreement, and a larger station was built in 1863, on the site of where it still sits today. 5 years later, the branch began carrying those sun-seeking Victorians to and from the haven of Hayling Island. And this continued until the 1st of November 1963, when BR axed the entire line, putting an end to the beloved Hayling Billy, a railway soaked in seaside nostalgia. And it was certainly a pleasure today to finally pay her a visit.
That then is all from us today. Thank you very much for coming along with us on this walk. Did you enjoy it?
Yes, I did.
Fantastic, that's all I need to hear. If you'd like to support WightWanderer, you can always join our members club, which is $1.99 a month. You get an array of bonus videos up on there. There's quite a few up there now, and you also get other perks as well. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and we will see you again very soon. Bye bye.